Thank you for joining this session of the Moore Global M&D Summit Series. This time we're talking about the Great Resignation, a phenomenon which has seen a huge upsurge in people leaving their jobs, which may be related as a direct result of the pandemic. The US Bureau of Labor Statistics says 4 million Americans left their jobs in July alone, and another study by HBS showed that it was those aged 30 to 45, often considered to be in the prime of their careers, who are most likely to go. So what's going on? And what can employers do to retain and attract talent? I'm Roland Main, editor of Moore Intelligence, and I'm moderating today's session. With me are Mark Fagan, Moore Global's industry leader for manufacturing and distribution, and a partner at Citron Cooperman in New York. Richard Cummings, strategic HR partner at Moore Kingston Smith in London. And Larry Dolinko, chief executive officer of ExecuSearch Group, which offers workforce solutions across the United States. Now, many reasons have been put forward for the Great Resignation. But Mark, what do you think is going on here?
Well, thanks again for having me, Roland, and happy to be here. Similar to what we've been talking about with supply chain issues, there's a multitude of causes for these resignations, including, during COVID, people were not changing jobs. So there's really a natural backlog of job movement when our world started to open up again. Also, employees now have choices that are geographically boundless. So that opens up more opportunities for the employees. And related to that, employers now have the ability to offer work from home. So those who are not offering that benefit are tending to lose employees. And one of the other things that we've seen is, frankly, employees are rethinking their priorities, rethinking their motives and their goals in life. So there's just a change in the dynamics, all these dynamics with working. What I see is, and what I'm talking with my clients about and really everyone's hearing, it's going to be critical for employers to understand the real reasons for these resignations, not based on hearsay or opinion, but based on quantifiable data in order to develop a proper and effective strategy for retention. So if retention wasn't a focus for a company in the past, it really needs to be now.
Very interesting, Mark. Larry, how do you see things?
Sure, Roland, again, thank you for having me today. So I think there's a myriad of reasons why people are leaving their jobs. Those include, as mentioned earlier, a shift of focus to more of a work-life balance position, individuals that didn't agree with the way their employer handled the COVID-19 crisis and their return to the workplace program. More specifically, employees that had to commute to their work, to their job in the past, and spend hours in the car, on a train, on a bus, etc. During the pandemic, that time was spent home with their families. It's time spent doing work. And if that employer mandated that their employees return to the office 4 days a week, 5 days a week, that could absolutely be a reason why people would leave their current role. Additionally, the strong candidate and talent-driven market we are in today, the ability for someone to try something new for the first time in their career, as well as very competitive pay and salaries. Companies are offering top dollar for hard-to-fill positions. Those are a handful of additional reasons why employees are leaving their current roles.
So Richard, what's your perspective?
Roland, thanks very much for having me here. It's great to be here. There's a number of reasons why people are starting to leave their jobs, and the pandemic effectively caused a recession. And like any recession, the labour market dives down. People tend to reevaluate where they're at, and when it picks up again, they look for other jobs. So we called this really when the pandemic looked like it was coming to an end. It was quite logical that people were going to be on the move and looking for new jobs. Larry's right. What the pandemic did is it allowed people to take stock of their lives. Companies had to become more flexible because employers for years have been asking for flexibility and more time off. And employers have been saying, we can't give it to you. Well, actually, the pandemic forced that. And it meant that we had to allow people to work from home, or we had to allow people to work in shift patterns that hadn't worked before. And we were able to do social distancing that we hadn't done before, which meant that people didn't have a commute and they were able to work much more flexibly in the hours that they want to work and still perform the duties of their job. Additionally, Larry's right as well, how people handled and how companies handled the employee kind of experience during the pandemic. So if you were slightly mistreated or felt you were mistreated by your employer, you're more likely to leave now. And it's employers now that really need to right the wrongs of what they've done. But I think the big thing has all been about work-life balance and the fact that there are loads and loads of job opportunities now. In the UK, we've got 1.1 million vacancies. That's up 300 to 400,000 vacancies pre-pandemic. So there are more jobs out there, and you can do jobs that you may not necessarily be completely skilled in, but employers are now willing to train you up.
Now, if we look beyond the Great Resignation for a moment, is there a generally accepted rate of staff turnover that companies should be comfortable with? How do they monitor those turnover rates? Richard, let's start with you.
Well, staff turnover, typically the rate that most companies look at, and the standard rate in the UK is 15 to 16%. So that's really 15% of your staff will leave over the course of a year. So if you're very small, that's obviously quite a significant figure, and if you're very large, that's also something that you've got to contend with. And those people are going to go, but it's how they exit. And we have good leavers and bad leavers, and people go for all sorts of reasons. I think the thing is that you look at voluntary turnover and you look at involuntary turnover. So involuntary turnover really is the thing that we kind of ignore, because these are the people that we don't want in our organization anymore, and we're quite happy for them to go. Voluntary turnover is the ones where actually they resign and we would much rather they were here. But I think really what you have to look at is that involuntary turnover as well, because generally we've all been there. There's people that have left the organization and you're quite glad to see the back of them because they haven't been very good employees. However, at one point they were good employees and something's happened. Something's changed to make them less engaged and they don't want to be here anymore. So your perception is that you're glad that they've gone. But really, we should be preventing that from happening. And it should be our managers and us as leaders that should be working out exactly where the disengagement is happening. And that will in turn reduce our voluntary turnover as well. So we could reduce those rates significantly if we become an employer of choice.
So what I'm seeing, and based on U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, I think, Roland, you might have mentioned this earlier, there should be no surprise that total annual separations are way up versus pre-pandemic numbers. In the private industry specifically, the 2019 total annual separation percentage was 49.7%. In 2020, that number increased to 57.3%. And my assumption is, I don't think this would be a surprise to anyone, that when 2021 numbers come out, we'll be way above that 60% number. Here at TESG, the ExecuSearch Group, our end clients are diverse. We work with financial institutions, healthcare companies, pharmaceutical companies, media conglomerates, consumer product organizations, and many, many more. And while those industries might vary somewhat in terms of staff turnover rate, the reality is, as Richard said, employees are leaving their companies for new positions in greater numbers than we've ever seen. And obviously, during this Great Resignation period, we expect that trend to continue into 2022 as the war for talent does continue.
And Larry, I don't think many employers pay much attention to their turnover rates and really understand what they are. It really has to be a data-driven approach now. You've got to do a couple of things if you want to keep the people you want to keep. And, like Richard said, help maybe not turn away some or not turn off some people. So you've got to quantify the problem, both the scope of the problem and its impact to the company. The resignation rate, it should be calculated, and it's basically the number of separations per year divided by the average number of employees. And like Richard said, you should use these formulas to identify the resignation rates from voluntary resignations versus layoffs and firings. Next, you have to identify the root causes of these resignations. Is it because of pay, time between promotions, training opportunities? Is it different among departments, locations of the company, and supervisors? A company should also quantify the impact of the resignations to the key business metrics. How expensive is this turnover? That knowledge really needs to be quantified, identified accurately before you can start to work on your retention strategy.
Now, right now, most companies are experiencing higher than normal turnover. Are there ways of predicting staff turnover and preventing the right employees going? Larry, what do you think?
That's a great question, Roland. And the way we look at it here is the way HR professionals can adapt processes and procedures to better understand why people are leaving is really a multifaceted type approach. First, we should be conducting anonymous surveys regularly, whether it's quarterly, biannually, or annually. We should be creating channels for employees to have a voice in a safe space. For example, employee resource groups, mentorship programs, confidential hotline, or through what we have here, dedicated HR business partners. And this will really allow for some resources within the company to have a better pulse on overall employee satisfaction. And conducting exit interviews for every employee that leaves and share that feedback directly with hiring managers and leadership for complete visibility and transparency is critical. And really, we think this will enable a company to detect those patterns and address them to institute a better culture and really increase that retention rate. In terms of predicting staff turnover, I think, Richard, you might have touched upon this earlier, really using data to see where the highest turnover exists and conducting really a qualitative and quantitative type survey to understand what cultural norms are in that division or line of business, and that's causing the attrition is really a key way to predict staff turnover. In terms of, Roland, I know you mentioned preventing the right employees from leaving. You need to identify that high potential staff. And that high potential staff is a little different than what we consider high performers, and give that high potential staff really high visibility type assignments, pair them with leaders as mentors, provide them with development opportunities, and make it known that we're investing in their future with us. Any underperformers, what we do is we leverage what we call a PIP, or performance improvement plan, as a way to see them improve, not as a tool to be used to manage them out. And that's how we look at preventing the right employees from leaving.
The danger is that companies only really look at turnover rates when they have a turnover problem. And you should probably look at it way before that. So you should have a look at what drives your employees. Larry's right about you need to measure engagement. You need to do surveys and understand what it is people are looking for, what motivates them. However, you can do survey burnouts. I know that during the pandemic, because we haven't seen people physically, we've responded to doing surveys to see what the engagement levels are like. If you really want to know whether people are engaged, you can see how many surveys you get back. Because if you only get a handful, they're probably not that engaged. There's a great saying that people don't leave companies, they leave managers. So really, we have to train our managers. We have to get them to do effective one-to-ones and annual appraisals. And if they effective one-to-ones are 6 weekly, they're 6 weekly. But really, depending on the nature of the employee, it might only work every 6 months. So don't over egg it too much. And otherwise, you'll see those people just paying lip service to it and they'll go as well. I think really, if you want to get people to be motivated, you need to understand what motivates them. And everybody's different. And we're going to get some people that actually want to move from company to company to experience different cultures and experience different places of work. And you're going to get some people that want to have not a job for life, because I'm not sure that exists anymore, but certainly a company for life. So a company that you can join and you'll progress through. And I think also, as Larry said, you need to look at your high potential employees as well and work on them and see what drives them forward, and really try and talk to them about where their career is going. And if they don't force their career upon them, not everybody wants to be promoted, not everybody wants to move to the next step, and we run the risk of over promoting people to senior positions that they don't want to be in, that they don't excel in, and that causes more turnover of the people that are underneath them.
Yeah, Richard, I agree 100%. And Larry put through some really excellent ways to quantify and collect the data. And the companies really need to take that data and compare it. Compare these resignations, again, by the different locations of the company, the different functions of the company, the departments. What managers have a higher rate of resignation than others? So who are the really good leaders that are inspiring people to progress through a company? And who are the managers who might really be pushing people out of the company? There could be differences in diversity groups as far as resignations, tenure, the age of employees. There might be indications that maybe the company is too rough on younger, inexperienced people versus experienced, and you're losing your talent of the future. Maybe training programs. So if there's certain departments that have a lot of access to training and others that don't, that might be affecting resignation. So there's a tremendous amount of data that can be collected, but then you've got to look at that data and understand the results of them. And a lot of companies now are using algorithms to predict which people and which groups are at risk of resignation.
So in this background, what's the potential cost of doing nothing? Larry, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, so the risk of doing nothing, not investing in your people, not conducting exit interviews, not getting the data to better understand why turnover exists in your organization, not addressing potential risks and issues would really be a mistake of mass proportions. The importance of retention in any organization, especially today, and especially during this Great Resignation time period that we are in, could be, and most probably would be, catastrophic to a company's growth. We here at TESG, as mentioned earlier, we put a tremendous amount of focus on hiring, onboarding, retention, and really what we are looking to do and continue to do is up our game in terms of providing our staff, our internal staff, with the best possible user experience. And that could be anything from training and development, upping our game in terms of our infrastructure from a technology perspective, and really the way we just do business on a day-to-day perspective. So really the risk of doing nothing is paramount to a company's success or failures.
Yes, and it's such a cascading effect as well, Larry. Just in some of the raw numbers, voluntary turnover cost $630 billion to U.S. employers in 2019, according to the Work Institute's 2020 retention report. And some other statistics on an individual level, for hourly employees, it costs companies about $1,500 for each resignation. For technical positions, it could be anywhere from 100 to 150% of the employee's salary. And these costs that are being quantified include recruiting costs, onboarding costs, lost productivity, customer service errors, training costs, and cultural impact. And those, especially the cultural impact, if you've got a company that is constantly losing people, it's going to be part of their culture. So it's just going to keep perpetuating itself and rolling downhill, and that snowball is going to get bigger and bigger. So, like Larry, I agree 100%. You almost can't quantify the damage that a poor retention policy and strategy will cause a company.
What I see is that companies really, they recruit. You should be recruiting for growth and not necessarily recruiting for replacements. And what you're going to see is that staff turnover creates staff turnover. So as people start to leave, more people start to leave. Those people start to leave, and Mark's absolutely right. The real cost is massive. It is more than an annual salary to replace somebody. And as Mark said, there's loads of reasons for that. But the big danger is the colleagues that they're working with. They go, the next person comes in, they leave. They go, the next person comes in, a few more people leave. So the people that have been there a long time, that are constantly picking up the slack for these people who haven't been properly onboarded into the organization, they're going to leave as well. And that's the brain drain that you face. So I think if you do nothing, the chances are in the short term, you'll just be recruiting for replacements. And then in the long term, you'll become known as the organization that people drip in and drip out of, and no one will come and interview for you. And you won't get anyone, and you'll be a victim of the recession.
Well, thanks, everyone. You've given us a fascinating insight into a very difficult problem. I'd just like to close by asking each of you what your predictions for Labour are in 2022. Mark, you first.
Well, Roland, I think that this Great Resignation is not going to end in 2021. I think there's still going to be a lot of movement. And if companies' leadership doesn't change behaviors to adapt to this hybrid work environment, the fact that you can't see people in person every day, you have to adapt to these different retention policies and really pay attention to it. If those changes aren't made by leadership, that's just going to elongate, I think, the amount of resignations that are going to continue in 2022.
I think the Great Resignation, as we've seen it now, really has only occurred in the autumn and winter of this year. I think it's going to continue for the whole of 2022. I don't think there's going to be a seismic shift. I don't think companies have reacted quick enough. I don't think enough managers have accepted that we're going to be in a hybrid environment for the long term. And I think that employees want more. And as Mark said, there's a certain demographic of people that are leaving. And I think we're going to see that get wider. And I think we're going to see pretty much most age brackets, ethnicities all start to follow as well and start to leave.
I would agree with both Richard and Mark in terms of the Great Resignation continuing into 2022. The way I envision is this COVID tail to really last through Q1 and into Q2. And we'll continue to see this hot candidate-driven market well into 2022 when top-notch and upper echelon candidates are receiving multiple offers and really having the pick of the litter. Clients need to continue to evolve. We do a really good job and put a real focus on trying to educate and continue to pass that knowledge to our clients in terms of what's going on in the labor market and what we're seeing as subject matter experts. And they need to make quicker decisions in their hiring process. There can no longer be this lengthy interview process and meeting comparison candidates. The longer a client waits to hire, the longer they wait to make a decision, the longer they're going to take to fill a job, and the more they will lose out on this top talent. So again, to Richard and Mark's point, this Great Resignation is going to continue well and into and through 2022.
Well, thanks everyone for your contributions. And it really sounds as if this Great Resignation is here to stay with us, and companies really need to understand what's happening, get retention policies in place, and make sure they keep the best people and can hire the best people.